Welcome to the Tech Basement. On today's episode, we're very excited to have Chad Sakac, Global Head of Pre-Sales and the leader of our VC Converged Infrastructure division.
Guys, Matt, Dean, it's great to be here. Hello, everybody.
And fellow Canadian.
Fellow Canuck. I was teasing you earlier. I mean, Dean, how many years have you been here now?
Just coming on 6 years.
So he still has not got the cool Aussie accent. So just a piece of, like a pro tip. If I were you, I would pick it up.
What are you talking about?
Very good.
So, with the Tech Basement, we always ask a very personal question to our guests. So the personal question is, what was your favorite gaming console growing up and why?
Okay, so can I ask for like a age band?
Yeah. So I was about 10. I had a gaming console. Did you have something then?
So the first system I ever had was a TI 99 4A, and this is I think I was like 6 or 7, and I really wanted a Commodore 64. And my parents, I really wanted a Commodore 64, and my parents always tried so hard. I love them dearly, and they would just always get it slightly wrong, right? So I came down Christmas time, TI 99 4A, which was a really great computer. It only had 16K of RAM, but it was the first thing that I learned how to program on, started to develop my own games, all that sort of stuff.
Wow.
But after that, my favorite gaming system, which was your question, would have been the original NES. Right?
Okay.
So I remember, man, the first Link, that was like, oh, the skies opened, and like, I loved it. So that one was the first system where I just got totally into the worlds of the games.
Yeah.
And when you go back and you see how they have to write code on those things, it's amazing that they could make anything work at all. However, right after that was when the first real Motorola 68,000 CPU-based systems started to arrive.
Yeah.
And once again, I was like, oh, I want an Amiga so badly. I want an Amiga. I want an Amiga. I want an Amiga.
I had Amiga.
And I should have really had like a paper route so I could make my own buying choices by this time.
Yeah.
And of course, I told my parents, and they got me an Atari ST. And you remember there was the Atari 520 ST. Those were the you couldn't quite justify the Amiga, which was way better. But I love that system. That was the first one where not only did I use it to play games and to write code, but I ran a BBS. On a USR 56K modem in my basement.
Wow.
And man, that was cool. Like the whole idea that there were people out there that wanted to talk to a nerd like me was an eye-opening experience.
I wonder if I was on the other side of the BBS.
I used to connect to ones in Toronto from St. Catharines, so I might have connected to one of yours.
You might have. It was so all of those systems to me all had like something beautiful about them that I dug and I loved. But each one of them had their own special moment. But gaming system would have to be the original NES.
Yeah.
Super Nintendo was really solid. I went out of consoles when Sega Genesis started to arrive and that sort of stuff. But today, inside the Sakac family household, we have 3 PS4s, 2 Xbox Ones,
Sounds a bit like my house.
2 Wii U's.
It's amazing though how many people seem to have had their entry into IT because of gaming, right? It's a springboard, male and female.
Totally.
Right? So moving on from tech geek and gamer to business leader.
Those are not separate. That's the same.
Two loves in the same. All right, and we've launched a new product and strategy, gone into a new market this year around hyperconvergence.
Yep.
Tell us, how's VXRack going?
We have got an unbelievably good problem to have, which is demand is currently 4x our supply.
Right.
So, it's interesting. Basically, in the tail end of the summer of 2015, we went and said, look, do we believe that hyperconverged infrastructure will increasingly be a critical part of the whole converged infrastructure consumption model? Answer, yes. Are we currently winning? Answer, no. Right? So, you got to look yourself bluntly in the mirror and go, like, is our current strategy working? And Evil Rail wasn't working for a series of reasons, so we had a good sit down between VMware and EMC and said, look, do we both agree that this is a really important market? Answer is yeah. Are we currently winning? No. What do we need to change? And we need to change a lot about the stack. vSAN needed to mature. The offer itself wasn't properly priced, packaged, for the market. And so we did a whole program reset, brought the whole team together into a single product team. That was an interesting lesson learned for me, like not just the techo, but the business side. It's really important anytime that you're in a particular market that's growing really fast, to have a very closed loop between the go-to-market, the people who engage with customers and sell, whether it's the direct sales force or the channel, and the product team.
So what was the feedback you were getting?
So basically, we would get feedback that, hey, this market it's not very price elastic. Like entry price point really, really matters. Mm-hmm. And Evo Rail starting price point was like $150 to $200K for an appliance.
Right.
We also heard feedback that people did not like the fact that you had to rebuy vSAN and vSphere, and if they had an ELA, they were like, I don't want to have to rebuy all this stuff. And the thing was that since we didn't have a closed loop where the product team, was actually separate from the go-to-market, mm-hmm. we weren't that feedback wouldn't land directly into the product team to adjust the product. So we did a full-blown reset. VXRail was born 100% different from a technology, a roadmap, but just as importantly, the structure of the offer, the product team, all that jazz.
More flexible configurations.
More flexible. That was the other thing. I mean, the original Evo Rail was like one appliance config period, full stop. And customers want to have more variability. In any case.
Yeah. So just on that though, you said, we sold out or we oversubscribed mm-hmm. in terms of off a small number.
Can you give us the specifics?
Yeah.
So basically, in Q1, we forecast that we would sell roughly around 150 units. Mm-hmm. We ended up selling about 200 in Q1. Yeah. Now, our supply chain for Q2 was forecast to be 600 units. Mm-hmm. We had to double our inventory, and then we've had to now double it again. So without being too specific, you can see it is going like it's shooting to the moon. I can't be too specific on the Q2 revenue numbers because in Q1 it wasn't material for EMC's overall revenue pool. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't get in trouble with the SEC and other regulatory agencies if I said, we sold 146 units in 37 countries around the world, which I did on the blog.
Okay.
In Q2, it is rapidly becoming material. So I can't be too specific about how we're doing in the Q2 bookings, but suffice it to say the revenue ramp rate is greater than the Extreme IO revenue ramp rate was.
Yeah. So on the Extreme IO side, all flash, 2016 mm-hmm. year of all flash, yep. right? Do you see the rail units, the all flash units now that it's available, ramping up faster than
Absolutely.
Hybrid?
So again, it's fascinating, and again, I don't know whether people who are watching are interested about this insider stuff. Yep. But there was a lot of discussion over, do we want to prioritize dedupe and compression for hybrids, right? Because the I/O path for a hybrid config is very different than the I/O path for an all-flash config, mm-hmm. particularly with these sorts of data services. Now, you can do those data services on hybrids. However, you need to then build and optimize your I/O path for data reduction in a hybrid, mm-hmm. which is very different than how you would optimize it for all-flash. So between the VMware vSAN team and the VXRail team, we said, do we want to just lean in hard on all-flash? Answer, clearly, yeah. Does it mean that we're going to have some, exposure to some of the other competitors in the hybrid configs? Sure. Yeah. However, in general, leaning into these changes that are inevitable is the right move, and we're seeing it. So the demand for the all-flash units is the hottest. Mm-hmm.
But the ramp rate on the hyperconverged platforms
it's amazing, right? And frankly, so currently we have the 3.8 terabyte SSDs that are in the current system configs.
Yeah.
The 7 terabyte drives arrive in Q3, and 15 terabyte drives arrive in Q4, mm-hmm. right? Now, it'll take a little bit longer before their dollar per gig bands are in the sweet spot, but holy smokes, it's all over but the crying.
Why would you do hybrid at that point?
Why? Magnetic media is going to continue to have a place for some amount of time, but not in these transactional use cases.
Yeah.
Period. Full stop.
And the roadmap, I saw a roadmap for Toshiba, 120 terabyte SSDs by 2018. Like, what's that going to do to the market?
And look, it's 2017 is going to be the first year where the first next generation non-volatile media types start to show up on the market. Again, there's a lot of hyperbole in the industry where people say, okay, that means that NAND is dead. And no, come on, that's being silly. But they will have their own ramp rate, and that'll be another interesting picture. It'll be back to hybrids, but not hybrids with magnetic media. It'll be hybrid
with different
phase
types
change,
of flash.
carbon nanotube, or and NAND.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, cool. And tell us about the big brother. So VXRack, how we Flex, SCDC.
So VXRack is the big brother of VXRail. Both of them are hyperconverged.
Yep.
Both of them use industry standard server hardware. Both are software defined. We see a very clear delta in the market with appliances, which basically say just plug it into whatever Ethernet switch you want. Start at price bands like below the 60K kind of price bands, and we're going to take that down and down even further, down below 30K over time with VXRail. But then as soon as you get to 10 or 12 appliances and you start to think, well, I'm going to need to scale this thing beyond a rack, clearly the networking domain becomes important. So people are like, when I say that, what do I mean? Do I mean that it has to be Cisco or someone else? No, that's not the point. The point is that the network has to be thought through. And the network has to be part of the management and orchestration domain because it's part of the system, right? So for us, the whole VXRack family, the defining element is hyperconverged, industry standard hardware, software defined, but is inclusive of the networking domain. Now, the VXRack system, like you said, comes with 3 different node types. Flex, which is designed to be vSphere, but also Linux, Hyper-V, and even bare metal configurations, and the near future Hyper-V as well. So in other words, Flex, meaning you could use it for different use cases. SDDC, which is I'm all in on VMware, and I just want it at rack scale, so I could deploy multiple racks worth at a time, which is VXRail at larger scale. Network is part of the system and M&O domain, and also includes SDN, NSX. By the way, the same thing goes with Flex. You can have it with NSX as well. And then Neutrino, which is the latest family member purely for cloud-native workloads. Now, if by the end of 2016, if I lick my finger and stick it in the air, I think that we will be the #1 market share leader in the hyperconverged appliance market, which is what most people think about when they think of VXRail and its competitors. To do that, we would need to have, call it, 4,000, 5,000 customers, right? Somewhere in that band, right? Maybe even more. Currently, we are at hundreds of possible VXRack customers with still, call it, below 100 of them around the globe. But if VXRail's average sale price is below 60K, the smallest VXRack systems start at around 350K because it includes rack, top of rack switches, et cetera, et cetera. The average customer size is somewhere around 80 nodes, right? Not one node, not one appliance, like 80 servers, right? And that means that their average size is much, much larger, right? It's measured an average of, call it $1 million.
On the 2 models, and not to dive into the competition, but when I've competed, and we've been out competing in the market with VXRail, right? We see some startup competitors in that space, but I don't see a lot in the rack space. Is it a different market? It's
a different market, and it comes down to fundamentally if I've been in a startup before. Have you guys done startup gigs before?
No. Nope.
Well, you're in the largest startup.
Now we are.
If you're a startup, you actually want to make the entry point as simple and as easy and as broad as possible. You don't want to have a go-to-market which is very complex, right? And the reality of it is that the appliance model is simpler and easier to sell, ramp, and drive through a channel. because it's a SKU, you sell it, the customer deploys it, it's fantastic. The customers always buy into the dream of I could scale this thing to infinity and beyond and do it without any disruption, because they see going from one appliance and then adding another with VXRail or VXRail's competitors, boom, snap it in, hit go, a few minutes later, it's expanded. Oh, I could do that again, I could do it again, great. What they forget is that if you decide that you want to scale it beyond a single rack, if you have to change the top of rack switch design, either for bandwidth reasons or for a spine leaf topology that would scale, all of a sudden that cluster, which has been so nice and non-disruptive, you're going to have to disrupt to basically redesign the top of rack switches.
Yeah. Yep.
You with me?
Yep. On that though, just while we're on that topic, would think about the scenario of lots of VX rails, right? They've started small scale, big. If a customer sorted out the fabric layer, would there be implications on the management side?
It is. As soon as you basically are going to operate with multiple racks worth of scale, the customers want to be able to see the health of CPU, memory, storage, but they also want to see health, performance of the physical and the software-defined networking domain.
Yeah.
Do you follow?
Yeah.
So if you're a startup, you say, well, I could build a product that by definition would start bigger, by definition, and it would have to have a much more sophisticated, ergo complex, not to the customer complex, but more software engineering, more development, because it would need to incorporate the SDN domain. If you're SimpliVity, Nutanix, or any of those folks, why would you do that? Yeah. You would start by, man, I'm going to get as many of these appliances out there, and then I'll figure out how to scale them up to the data center afterwards, right? Yeah. Conversely, for us, we just saw many of the customers who said, I love the vBlock in the sense that the vBlock does incorporate the network into the system design, but I want it to be a hyperconverged, scale-out thing increasingly. They want the networking to not be an afterthought if they're in the enterprise data center, whether they're homogeneous or heterogeneous, and they want it to be part of the management orchestration domain. Gotcha. Now, so secret.
We won't tell anyone.
We don't tell anyone. We do think that there is a need for us to eventually be able to have the management and orchestration tools inside VXRack SDDC, for example, to be able to incorporate VXRail nodes.
Right.
Because we already see some customers loving VXRail inside their data center.
Yeah.
And they're like, you're right, we agree with you on this networking domain. Currently, they need to start with a VXRack SDDC or a VXRail.
Yeah.
And many of them have said, can we just start with VXRail, and when we get to 10, somehow just be able to suck those into...
That would be awesome.
Yeah. It's
working on it.
a great scaling model, right?
Yeah.
It's great. Start small, scale big, and you're solving a problem. Take us through, so with the Dell merger, right, that we're going through, and what's happening with VXRack, VXRail, what's the plan?
So the first thing is that it was public. So this is public information. I'm not saying anything that isn't already out there. So Dell, as a separate company from EMC, already resells VXRail and VXRack.
Yeah.
Right, and that's been interesting to see how that business has ramped. It highlights the power of Dell's reach and go to market. And that they turned that on and started to ramp that business in a heartbeat, right? So that is currently underway and will continue on. Should the Dell deal close, it'll continue right up to that point. After that point, both VXRack systems and VXRail systems will be, in essence, a Dell EMC product, right? So at that point, it won't be an arm's length resell. It would just be part of the product portfolio.
Gotcha. Does that mean we're going to see Dell Compute in those solutions?
Yeah, so we try not to make a big fuss right now about what compute is inside those systems, because to the customer, they really shouldn't care. They're buying a system, right? However, clearly, it will be an incredible superpower to be able to leverage Dell's supply chain. And again, it's fun to take on new gigs and do different stuff because you learn different things. Moving from a role where I was responsible for all the SEs, my SE brothers and sisters around the world, thank you everybody, I love you all, to a role where I'm doing that, but I also have got this general management P&L for the converged platform business.
Yeah.
I've started to see like, wow, the supply chain stuff is non-trivial, right? So currently we have 3 different hardware platforms, and each one of those 3 hardware platforms come in 7 different variations of CPU, memory, flash, non-flash, for VXRack systems.
Yep.
And inside VXRail, we currently have 5 different configurations of 1, 2U, 4N form factor, right? It's very difficult for us to predict in advance, even though we model and we build our forecast about how many people are going to want what type of config.
Yeah.
The reality of it is that customers want choice and they want to be able to pick what they want, which means if you think about the supply chain, the ability to have the world's best supply chain to be able to do just-in-time configs. And ultimately, while the hardware itself is secondary inside these hyperconverged systems, where it does matter is insofar as it defines the economic envelope, meaning
Volume.
There's a volume and a pricing element in there that even though the server platform is a relatively small part of the differentiated value, the value is all in the software stacks, the SDN stack, the SDS stack, and the management and orchestration stack. In the end, cost of goods sold, meaning price for all watchers, right?
Yeah.
A huge component of the overall offering price is dependent on the server supply chain.
Right.
So, to answer your question very bluntly, will you see the Dell hardware inside VXRack and VXRail offers? Should the deal close, you could expect to see that very quickly.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And on the mix, right? And we have a large part of our business that comes from traditional storage systems, traditional converged platforms, but also environments. Do you see that at some point the revenue mix would shift? The world will shift more towards hyperconvergence than it does today on traditional models.
So, an unusually curt and concise answer: yes. Period.
Can you give us a date?
Now here's the challenge that we all face as nerds, geeks, passionate technologists, however you want to phrase it. We have a tendency to get sucked in because of our own passion into the hyperbole that you see from analysts and from people in the press, where they often don't have this stuff quite right. Yeah. Currently, the converged infrastructure market. Okay, so first things first, there's an IT market, $2.7 trillion. That's a big $2.7 trillion circle, right? In that, the infrastructure component is, call it about $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Okay. Inside that $1 trillion circle, the storage, meaning the externalized storage TAM, NetApp, EMC, HDS, HP, everybody, and bazillion gaggle of startups, right? Roughly about a $60 billion, maybe a $70 billion circle.
Yeah.
The software-defined circle is much, much smaller than that. It's about $5 billion. All forms of software-defined storage.
But growing.
But growing.
Yeah.
By the way, the externalized storage market as a whole, that 60
shrinking.
to 70, is shrinking. There's portions of it that are growing faster. Extreme I/O, all-flash VMAXs. Rack scale flash, all that stuff. But, there's, as a whole, that circle is shrinking, right? Now, put aside...
I feel like we should have planets appearing behind us.
So if I put aside the storage market, put that aside for a second, and now say, let's talk about the converged infrastructure market. Okay? To us, converged infrastructure is inclusive of things like VBlocks, monolithic systems that have traditional compute network storage as an integrated system.
Yep.
And another system form of converged infrastructure consumption is hyperconverged. We struggle with this because people think CI, they think VBlock. It's almost like Kleenex, right? Inside the converged infrastructure market is about $6 billion, of which VCE, yay, is about 3 point and change, right? So we're north of 50% of that CI market.
Yep.
That CI market, $6 billion, is growing at 20% per annum. Wow. Right? So if you think about that, that's a clear, the market is voting with its feet. Increasingly, they want to buy and consume as opposed to build. So even though the infrastructure market as a whole is kind of shrinking with shifting going on, CI is growing.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the hyperconverged infrastructure market, depending on who you ask, varies between $1 billion and $1.5 billion in size. Today. Right? It is growing at somewhere between 50 and 70% CAGR.
Wow. Even more.
Okay? So even more. By the way, within the CI category, remember I said all of CI, that $6 billion, is growing at 20%.
Yep.
VCE is growing north of 40%. So V blocks and VX blocks continue to grow like this.
Yep.
Right? However, the hyperconverged circle, 1 to 1.5 billion, is growing at 50 to 70% CAGR. So after, call it around 2018, 2019, the hyperconverged infrastructure market will be the same size as the classic CI market, things like V blocks.
Right. 2018 or 19.
2018, 2019.
Is the crossover point.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Now, by the way, the reason I'm just explaining all that is that when you say stuff like, do you see that as more of the future? And I say, yes, period.
Yeah.
There's a human tendency to go, well, that's it, everything's it. And that's not how stuff works.
Yeah.
Right? It takes time. It takes time for things to mature, customers to adopt.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, when people talk in these black and white positions, they sound like American politicians, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It requires a little more nuance, but if you're willing to dig in and learn and are willing to hold in your brain more sophisticated constructs, where it's not black and white, and you're like, this is going to grow like this, it's going to slow, this is going to grow like this, you can see why it's so important to have partners, technology partners, that have a portfolio that covers the whole gamut.
Yeah, gotcha. So I want to change tunes a little bit. I'm conscious of time, so we'll keep this concise.
I'm here for you guys.
Tell us about NHC. What's Native Hybrid Cloud? What's behind the logic of what was launched? Where's it going?
The reason I always have these very long-winded answers, I know it's annoying. I know it's really annoying, and my blog posts
I know how
are
the rest of
annoying.
our team feels now.
I'm sorry.
It's good. It's good.
It's because how I learn.
Yeah.
Like, to me, I always need to understand the how and the why, and then if I understand that, I can then extrapolate. I can understand something better and extrapolate outwards.
Yeah.
Right?
Gotcha.
So, not as concise as you want, Matt. But 2 years ago, we started to see several things very decidedly. The use of open source software within our customer base started to skyrocket. And here I'm not just talking about Linux. Linux was mature and adopted within the enterprise for the last 10 years, right? Here I'm talking about the whole just crazy ecosystem of everything in Apache Hadoop, from the core, the core 4 projects all the way out to things like Cassandra and Spark and other things that are around the periphery of Apache Hadoop.
Yeah.
Things like OpenStack, where people were trying to figure out how to leverage OpenStack, where to leverage it, to the beginnings of starting to see container and container managers and cluster managers ecosystem. So here I'm talking about Docker, CoreOS, Rocket, Mesos, Kubernetes, all just start to pop up inside the customer base. And what we started to do is we started a lot of point work projects to integrate into Mesos and the Docker ecosystem. We were actually the first storage vendor to build a primary storage platform exclusively on containers, which was ECS.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know it, but Unity and the VMAX All-Flash and VMAX 3 platforms are dependent on containerization as their core
Internal
engine
to run it,
for services. So we were using these technologies, and then we were integrating with the ecosystem with Cinder, Swift implementations, leveraging Keystone, plugging into Mesos and Docker, giving them a persistence engine, which is that VXRack project on EMC code, all that sort of jazz. So we're doing all that stuff, but what we started to see was the projects invariably would fail at the customer. And when I say that, everyone's like, "Well, you're poo-pooing." No, it's not that the technology isn't good. It's that those ecosystems are so dynamic and changing so quickly, and the skill base, like you can't throw a stick without hitting a VCP certified. Even the VCDX community is now much, much bigger than it was before. And how many people are EMC, proven professionals? How many people are CCIEs and Microsoft certified experts and Oracle and all. In other words, there's a whole vast skill pool for these traditional domains.
Mm-hmm.
It is really hard to find people with these skill sets for these new Platform 3 cloud native ecosystems.
Yeah.
And even if you find them, retaining them is nearly impossible.
Mm.
So what we're finding was people would start projects, even if they were successful with their OpenStack deployment, when it came time to go from Kilo to Lima, if the person on that project left, their ability to sustain it just went. Right.
So I think you're talking about infrastructure people who get the OpenStack, containerized. Those resources are hard to find. But there's developers building apps who get the world of Java and the apps that run on top of these things.
The other thing that we were seeing was that the reason that all this stuff was occurring was that the more important top-down thing that was going on inside the customers is the CEO would say, I need to build the digital enterprise agenda. I read about it on this magazine while I was on the flight. Go off, figure it out. Right?
Got my business strategy.
I got my business strategy. Yeah. But a digital bank, next generation media, retailers wanted to figure out how to change the way that they interact with their customers. You name the industry, and they would start projects where they would leverage these new cloud native application architectural models,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd say, infrastructure team, I want this infrastructure as code thing that everyone keeps talking about so we can have a DevOps culture, right? And the infrastructure teams would try to leverage these technologies to assemble that, but the failure rate of build versus buy was even more profound than it is in the more traditional infrastructure domain,
Mm-hmm.
due to skills, technology stack maturity, all that jazz.
Yep.
So it's fascinating because it actually, if you go back and you take a look at it, it was about 2 years ago that we acquired Cloud Scaling. And the theory behind the Cloud Scaling acquisition was we said, hey, we've developed something very neat in ECS, which is a container and cluster manager designed to deploy resilient, persistent storage stacks. It's a weird idea because basically it doesn't blam the ECS code into a container running on top of OpenStack, running on top of Linux.
Yeah.
It literally has a container manager right at the base level of the hardware,
Mm-hmm.
right? Linux, of course, but then container on top. And then we actually would deploy things inside the containers that are non-ephemeral, meaning like they're steady state, right? And we went, maybe, just maybe, we could take this idea and apply it to these broad ecosystems, inclusive of OpenStack, but really thinking about Photon platform, thinking about the Apache Hadoop ecosystem, and say, make the core open source trunk easy to deploy and sustain. Right? To pull that off, we needed to juice up the amount of open source DNA inside the company, and we wanted to use OpenStack as the first attempt to see, could we apply this idea to make cloud native stacks easy to deploy? That was the Cloud Scaling acquisition. And at EMC World this year, we publicly announced, and it'll GA in Q3, VXRack with neutrino nodes, which is this multi-rack, multi-cloud native IaaS stack. Now that is fascinating because we've made something really complex, very, very turnkey, right? And it literally leverages just the core open source trunk. So, if you want to be as vanilla as you can inside the core open source ecosystem, that's what it does.
Yeah, but it gets rid of this problem that people have of I can't get the skill set to build and maintain this thing. It's turnkey. It's done for you. You just operate it and
turnkey, single support for everything inside the stack. And again, it's not that we don't recognize that some customers are going to want to build, and we support that ecosystem. It's more that we think more and more people should buy and consume rather than build. Now, the thing I want to highlight is EMC, we always make the mistake of talking about the foundation and then building up. The more important thing is the native hybrid cloud stack. Because the reason that people are deploying these cloud native IaaS is because they just want their developers to be able to get cooking with Cloud Foundry faster. Right? And we basically have tackled this from both directions. So the native hybrid cloud is the easiest way for a customer to get up and running with a new cloud native application development methodology. PCF Ops Manager, turnkey integration inclusive of reporting, chargeback,
Gotcha.
gives the IT operations team visibility inside the language of these new developers so this whole DevOps culture can emerge.
Yep.
And if you want to have a turnkey bit of infrastructure on which it runs, VXRack Neutrino or VXRack Flux for customers who want it with vSphere.
Gotcha. That's awesome.
By the way, can I
Powerful
try?
story.
Can I try to make that like super easy? The super easy version of that is if you want to go as quickly as possible and accelerate your developers so that you can go from decision to first line of code 3 times faster, from first line of code into production 2 times faster, with infrastructure that is 10 times more efficient, the best way to do that is the native hybrid cloud running on VXRack Neutrino.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and look, and I think what I've seen is a ton of customers try to do DevOps and agile development on legacy infrastructure, the same processes that they've had for many years, same infrastructure, and it fails because that platform slows them down. So moving to this solves that.
Can I
challenge.
respectfully disagree just one iota?
Sure.
I told the guys at Gartner this at the EMC World thing. We had an analyst day, so there's like 200 analysts, and I kind of said, hey guys, respectfully, this bimodal IT thing is right and wrong. It's right in the sense that, yes, there are 2 very clear, different operating models. Those 2 different operating models tend to create different stacks, both application stacks and infrastructure stacks to support them. True.
Yeah.
However, they make it very black and white that you have to go bimodal. And while ultimately that's the approach that I see customers having the most success with, when I was there, I actually had this customer express script sitting right beside me, and they're like, look, we're just getting started, and we've deployed PCF on top of EHC, on top of vBlock, and it's working fine. Now, and they're like, okay, I'm like, great, so you decided to run your new cloud-native apps on the same infrastructure. And they said, yes. And I asked, how's it going? They're like, great. They go, so I'm like, elaborate. And they go, well, it's because we built a different operating model for our traditional infrastructure that was more geared towards this new cloud-native way. And I'm like, okay. And I said, if you fast forward this and you're moving beyond your first new digital prescription fulfillment apps, and it's a huge part of your business, do you think you'd then build 2 stacks that you optimize? They're like, yes. That's a more complete, nuanced version of this, right?
Gotcha. Yeah. But as long legacy infrastructure and legacy processes, if you don't change those in some way, you're going to struggle with when you're trying to adopt a DevOps.
That I agree with. Right?
That's very good. All right, now we are short on time. It's been absolutely fantastic.
You can keep going.
No, we've got other sessions for you to do. We've got a whole conference going on here, the SE conference. Now, one last question I wanted to ask. So, at some point in the future, you will hand over your pre-sales leadership responsibility. You'll purely run the VC team. Hopefully, still a bit of that spiritual leader to pre-sales as well. But there will eventually be somebody who takes the reins. What's the advice? What would you want to tell them? And what should they know going head on to this role?
So, first things first, I will never leave pre-sales. What do I mean by that? We are a tribe more than anything else. People, org structures are so passé and irrelevant. The thing that binds people is their tribe. People with shared belief, shared passion, all that sort of stuff. And I had a saying for the V Specialist team that was like, once a V Specialist, always a V Specialist. That was never really about being a V Specialist. It was, once you're part of a tribe, you can never really escape, right? And you don't want to. So
we're not going to let you.
No.
So whoever's my successor is going to have to deal with this annoying person who's going to constantly be like, hey, what about this? So what I would tell my successor would be the following. Number one, it's an incredible tribe of people. 3.5, almost 4,000 passionate individuals who love mastery, who love autonomy, and frankly thrive with autonomy and then purpose, right? Like that. Those things really are very true inside the bones, the DNA, the culture of our team, our family, right? I would say that what they would find and discover is an incredible culture of willingness to self-disrupt, and a customer centricity that is incredible. I would encourage them to take a look at the pre-sales manifesto. When I wrote that thing, and posted. It was like day one of me being in the pre-sales gig. It wasn't a new idea for me. That's the way it's always been for me, right? So if anybody wants to understand how I see the world, at least that's a good place to start. I would highly encourage them to build their own manifesto. So if they want to steal liberally, right? But
but having seen that, when it first came out, I got to say this word manifesto for the Australian
you told
culture.
me. I remember you going, "Oh,
who is this guy?" And years later, and when candidates come to interview, I send it to them and say, "This is if you're passionate about these things, join the pre-sales team. If you're not, it's but it's because it's so fundamental to the culture, the identity." I don't know what else you'd do.
The person that would ultimately succeed me, I would just say start there, recognize the incredible talent pool, both at the leadership level, at the individual contributor level, and by the way, inside pre-sales, this is true of any org, but it's very true of the SEs. Leadership and organizational structure have no connection, right? There are thought leaders who carry more influence that have no reports, right, inside our organizational structure, but recognize the incredible team that they've got, create their own sense of purpose or manifesto. There's some good principles in there that I'd encourage them to evaluate, steal, use, make their own, whatever. I would say keep and treasure the fact that we have a duty and a responsibility that flows from the fact that we are naturally at the intersection of so much. We're the intersection between the customer, the partners, everything in the field, what works, what doesn't, our services brothers and sisters, right, on implementation, on customer service, and of course the product and engineering teams. And recognize that if there's one thing that they can do as leaders is to support that tribe and enable that natural nexus to get as much leverage as they can.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yes.
Chad Sakac, president of VCE,
Guys.
spiritual leader of pre-sales.
Come on.
Awesome. Have a fantastic week here in Australia.
By the way, you guys have got an unbelievable team here in Australia. What an amazing country. I think that Canadians and Aussies share a fair amount of
We're like-minded.
brothers and sisters in Canada.
Yeah.
And thank you to all the viewers.